Okay, folks. Okay, folks, here we go. I was asked to come here and talk about some insurance issues. So I'm going to set up some guidelines here. This is, again, for anybody, I don't know, is there anybody new here that haven't been the first thing? Okay, so my name's Dave Shew. I'm a retired CAL FIRE chief. I worked for CAL FIRE for 32 years. When I retired in 2018, I started getting phone calls from the insurance industry. Now, I'll tell you how that all started, because I told you about IBHS, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They're all funded by the insurance industry. And when the campfire and things started happening, there's a professor named Steve Quarles, Dr. Steve Quarles, who was one of the primary wildfire researcher at IBHS and came up with a lot of the guidelines that we use today. And Steve and I had become very good friends as I was working in Sacramento and dealing with a lot of the problems for the state and things like that. And when the campfire hit, the insurance industry just started bombarding Steve because they all knew Steve. He worked at IBHS, he'd done all these tests and everything, and he said, whoa, 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 whoa. He goes, you gotta stop a second, folks. He goes, I'm a scientist in a laboratory. He goes, I'm not a firefighter. I don't know about that stuff. I've never been to a fire before, but I know a guy. So he calls me up and says, the insurance world is just blowing my phone up, and I told him I know a guy. Would you like to talk to them? And my initial response, because this was all about the campfire, right? And as controversial as I knew that would be with the cause and the death and destruction and everything else, my initial reaction was, oh no, I don't want to talk to anybody about this. But he said, I think you should. So I started talking initially with the reinsurance industry. Anybody know what reinsurance is? I had never heard of reinsurance before. I didn't even know it was a thing until after the campfire. And now today, some of my best friends work for Aon and Munich Re and Tokyo and things like this. So it is the reinsurance industry that insures the insurance companies. So when the insurance companies get losses, the reinsurers are the ones paying for those losses. So they were even more interested in understanding what was happening out there than the insurance industry itself, because they basically were paying the loss factors out. So within about less than a month after the campfire had started, and it was still, I mean, they hadn't even opened the town yet back up and things like that, I found myself in London for a week giving presentations, and the whole thing just took off from there. So I've done a lot of consulting with insurance companies and things like that, but I'm not in the insurance business. I really am hopeful that this bar and all your expectations aren't like way up here, because what I'm doing, I've done a lot of consultation with insurance companies, but what I'm going to talk to you about here today are just my own viewpoints and thoughts and considerations based on those conversations I've had and things like that. They're my own opinions, and I'm way open to having discussions with all of you. I know every one of you probably have some story to tell about the challenges that perhaps you faced with insurance, or your neighbors, or something like that. So I'm just as interested in learning from you as you are from me, and I welcome other perspectives about this. But I do want it to be known that, I don't work in the insurance industry, and it's interesting to me, they all require me to sign non-disclosure agreements whenever I start working with them, because they don't want me to talk about whatever their bottom lines and their risk models and things like this. I'm not allowed to speak about any of those things. And I've told every one of them, it's like, you don't have to worry about it. Once you guys start talking about all that kind of stuff, you might as well be speaking Greek to me. I don't understand what you're talking about a bit more than the man in the moon, and I couldn't repeat it to someone if I had to. So I'll sign your NDA, but it really is pointless, because I don't even understand what all these things are that they talk about. I couldn't even repeat them if I had to. But what I do know is that the insurance industry overall was caught off guard by all this. And that really kind of changed everything. And I put some slides together to kind of talk about some of this stuff. In my meetings and workings with the insurance industry, I came to find out a couple of things. And it actually caught me off guard because I thought the insurance industries really had their finger on the pulse. I thought they were really, really good at this kind of thing. And I was wrong. They were not prepared for what has been happening. And what ended up happening is that when they have big losses, they would have these little blips on the radar screen. The Oakland Hills fire, the tunnel fire in 1991 was a big blip on the radar screen. And that was a big blip for CAL FIRE too. I was working at a fire station just east of Oakland. It was my initial attack area, and because out of that 1,600 acres, there were actually 24 acres that burned in SRA, so we had to do a report. And I had to do the report for CAL FIRE back then for the tunnel fire. And here were the things. When we were doing the report, you have to go online and fill out all these things and all these questions about stuff. And one of the questions that said, how many structures were damaged or destroyed? The boxes for the answer only went to 3 digits. At the time that the program had been built for reports on fires, it was so inconceivable that you could ever have a fire that would burn 1,000 structures down. They didn't even build the report to have more than 3 figures. The second thing that I came against a wall was, what was the dollar loss? And it only went to 9 digits. Again, the idea of a $1 billion fire was completely inconceivable. It was so inconceivable that they didn't even build the report to do it. Of course, I called up Sacramento and said, I'm trying to do my report and I don't know what to do here. And the response was like, we'll get back with you. But what I ended up doing is just putting 9s across the board, and then in the comments section, I said, and the real numbers were this. That kind of thing. But what happened in the Oakland Hills fire then translated into another big blip in 2003 when the Southern California siege hit, and again in 2007, and then the Valley Fire and the Butte Fire in 2015. And that was, that was only 8 years after the big sieges in Southern California. And then in 2017, of course, the North Bay fires and all those kind of things, that was a big blip. That finally surpassed the Oakland Hills by a lot. And all these things started happening, and that was a big blip, and they kind of like took, all the eyebrows went up in the insurance industry. But again, it was considered to be just an anomaly. It wasn't the norm. It wasn't a precedent-setting thing. It was just a big blip, and they could weather that blip until the following year and the Camp Fire hit, and Paradise went down. And the collective scream, you probably all heard it, was what the hell is going on out there? That was sort of the question they asked. And when I started talking with the insurance folks, I asked them, I said, why is this as foreign to you as it is? I thought you guys really had your finger on the pulse, and this is what they told me. Essentially, they said that wildfires have always been a part of their portfolio. They cover wildfire losses, they always have, that kind of thing. But it was a very, very tiny percentage of what they were doing. In fact, one of them told me that said, look, you got to understand the perspective from where we sit. If we have a bad hailstorm on a summer day in Dallas, that causes more damage than all the wildfire payouts that we make for the entire year. So wildfires had never reached a point in their portfolios to be a big concern for them. When they did have these little blips, they were just always able to cover it. But back-to-back fires in 17 and 18 now eclipsed. Instead of being that little blip on the radar screen, they were paying out more losses than hurricanes and wind damage. And that made them wake up and take notice. And the fact is, they were simply unprepared. They didn't realize that something like that was going on. And the insurance industry has a lot of very, very smart people working for them. They are brilliant forecasters. They spend a lot of money predicting and noticing where the trends are going, what's going to happen, and being ready for it, being ready for the next disaster, being ready to cover those things, because that's their bottom line. Found out very quickly that the insurance companies, they're not 501c3s. They're not nonprofits. Trust me, they are not nonprofits. And so their bottom line means a lot to them, and it means a lot to the customers, because they have to have a healthy balance sheet in order to pay out these losses. That's what they're there for, okay? So I'm actually going to be in Scottsdale, Arizona, talking to a big insurance conference in 2 weeks, because I was asked to come and talk about some of this stuff and things like that. But what ended up happening is that, you know, when these losses just ratcheted up and became bigger than all their other losses, they weren't ready. They had not done their homework, they hadn't been prepared for it, and they really got pretty angry at themselves. You know, why weren't we prepared? Why did we not see this coming? And so since 2018, they have been scrambling. And we are in the midst of a massive, massive transition of how the insurance industry is dealing with wildfire. This is not the first time the insurance industry has ever dealt with these kind of things. They've gone through this before, particularly with hurricanes. Does anybody remember Hurricane Andrew from 1991? Okay, completely wiped out Homestead, Florida, and many other parts around Miami, and all these kind of things. And that was the camel that broke the camel's back for the insurance industry related to hurricanes. They weren't ready for hurricanes when Hurricane Andrew hit, and at least 8 insurance companies immediately went bankrupt overnight, because they had not done a good job of diversifying their accounts. They had too many eggs in one basket, and when they lost everything, they were done. And none of them want to do that. And so it took about 10 years for the insurance industry to completely rethink their entire portfolio, their risk management models, everything about hurricanes and wind and water damage with those kind of things. And it took them about 10 years to completely reconstruct their risk analysis models and get a better grip on hurricanes. But they did, and they're actually very good at it today. And as bad as the hurricanes continue to be, they are prepared for it, and you're not seeing those kind of losses anymore, even with the likes of Hurricane Ian that just hit Florida late last year and all those kind of things. They're weathering those storms fairly well. But now it's wildfire's turn, and they're going through those same traumatic changes that they had to go through to learn about how to be more in tune with hurricane losses. They're doing the same thing with wildfire losses. So they're learning quick. They're learning very quickly. But they're a long way from knowing all of it. And I would say if you factor in that 10-year window that it'll take them to really completely change, we're about in the middle of it. I'm going to make the argument that maybe we're, probably, that 10-year period beginning in 17 or 18, we're probably halfway through the change that they're going through to kind of get a better grip on this kind of stuff. They're going to be improving their risk analysis model. And if any of you know, these big, broad assumptions for many, many decades, the insurance industry took a scope of very large landscape scale assumptions. They said, if you live in this zip code, that is a very dangerous zip code, and therefore, we don't want to cover you there, or we'll drop you, or you have to do exorbitant things, or whatever the case may be. But they just looked at it as a zip code. And if you lived in that zip code, and you had done all the things that we're talking about today, you took those dials and you dialed in the home hardening and your risk analysis and your exposure risk, and you were the poster child of everything that we're asking you to do from a wildfire perspective, didn't really matter because you lived in that zip code, right? That's all going to change. I cannot stress enough how important that all of this work that we've been talking about here is going to be for you personally and your neighborhood, because now they have to start taking stock of it. I'll come back to this in a second because I want to look at, the regulatory packages. There is a program of new regulations that Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara put in place last October, okay? It's called Safer from Wildfires, and it's the new regulatory package that he gave the insurance industry 180 days, 6 months, for them to all submit new rate packages that outline how they are going to address wildfire issues. The deadline for those submissions are April 12th, just a couple of weeks from now. So that's going to change things because the insurance industry will submit their rate packages where they have to describe how they're going to consider and take into account work that you are doing on your property, and they just don't have the luxury of saying, oh, you live in this dangerous zip code, we don't care, you're gone. They don't ever cancel anybody, by the way. They just simply non-renew your policy, okay? Tomato, tomato, whatever. But that kind of thing. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, we heard from our insurance person that one of the things that we're also going to see is the change that happened after the Thomas fire and the debris flow, where the insurance industry was forced to cover the debris flow under a fire policy.
Yeah, so the question for those remotely, that after the Thomas fire and the debris flow that occurred in the Montecito area and such, they were then required to cover the losses from that debris flow because it was a result of the wildfire. Even though it was a month later, it was a result of the wildfire, and it wouldn't have happened had the wildfire not denuded the hillsides. So that is true, that they're being forced to cover those kind of things. So we're all anxiously awaiting that April 12th deadline. And it's, oh gosh, I've talked to a couple of the deputy commissioners, not Commissioner Lara himself, about this, but a couple of the deputy commissioners that I've worked with on some other projects have told me that they've had very few insurance companies actually submit their packages yet, which is normal because you don't want to put your package in early and give the opportunity for maybe some of that information to leak and your competitors start seeing what you're doing, so they react to that. So the most likely scenario here, folks, is that there will be this massive dump from hundreds of insurance companies all putting their packages in on April 12th. Maybe a few will come in on April 11th, but most of them will come in on April 12th. And then what happens is that the insurance commissioner's office will have to review and approve all of those packages, which is going to take a little time. And I don't even want to hazard a guess as to how much time that might take. I'm just not even going to hazard a guess. I don't know. I don't know how, what they're going to have to review. They don't know what the packages are going to look like either, so they're not sure how long it will take them either. So we just have to wait for that process to go through. But once that does, I'll get to you in a moment, once that does, it's going to require them to recognize the work that you and your neighborhoods have taken to help reduce your risk of wildfire impacts. And that's why it is so critical and so important that you take the steps that you need to start hardening your home. Keep that long-term maintenance going. Do the defensible space programs. Build that 5-foot non-combustible zone, which is really hard. How many here, think about this really quickly. I tell everybody, go home and take everything around your house for 5 feet and get rid of it. There shall be nothing flammable within 5 feet of your house. Nothing. It is completely a non-combustible zone. How many of you are willing to go home and do that this afternoon? It's a beautiful, nice day. You can go out and do it, right? I maintain that we're in a world today where the science and the research and what we're learning from all those tests at IBHS and NIST and everything else is accelerating at lightning speed. We're learning a lot very, very quickly. We know so much more today than we did 5 years ago, so much more. I could not have given this talk to you today and even told you about a fraction of the things that I had up there on the board because we didn't know. But we know today, and 5 years from now, we'll know even a lot more than we know today. Let's all come back here in 5 years and we'll have a whole different conversation because it'll all be new. But what's happening is that coming up with these suggestions on what to do aren't just simple little acts of writing regulatory language on paper. And trust me, working in Sacramento, I did a lot of work with the legislature and the governor's office on regulatory packages and things like that, and it's words on paper, folks. But how do you enforce something like that? Because I would argue, and probably most of you in this room, maybe not so many of you in this room because you're all here to learn and absorb fire-resistant stuff, but I'm going to share with you that telling people to change the entire concept of their landscape around their home is very, very difficult for a lot of people. I've had people actually tell me this: I'm not taking Grandma's prize rose bush out. That's Grandma's prize rose bush. That stays. It's like, I don't care what you do to me. I've got a 250-year-old historic oak tree sitting 4 feet from my house. It's not coming down. What do you do? And the fact is that our paradigm of what we think of as attractive landscaping around their homes has been driven by 200 years of tradition. As this country evolved and we've moved through the 20th and the 19th centuries, we're now in the 21st century, I'm going to say that overall, especially in the United States, our culture has evolved as living in freedom on our properties to do what we want, and we want our houses to look like we're a part of nature. We want to be a part of nature. We want it to look like it's integrated into the landscape. And that's why we push a bunch of brush and trees and bushes right up against the house, because it makes it look attractive. And I think would argue that most of society sees that as their paradigm. This is what attractive landscaping looks like to them. This is what they think about. This is what they know. And now suddenly on a dime coming up here and telling everybody that, well, that's wonderful, but it's all wrong and you got to take it all out. That's going to be really tough for a lot of people. It's going to be very, very difficult. And so I would argue that the social changes that are required to make those things happen are much, much more difficult than writing regulatory language on paper. And the insurance industry is going to follow those guidelines because, why? They do work. We know that a non-combustible zone 5 feet around the house significantly reduces the likelihood of an ignition of your house. That's just plain fact. And the research and science proves that that works. So if you're an insurance company and say, so that's what we want people to do because that reduces our losses because fewer homes will burn down now. So now we've got this tug of war going between what our society and our paradigm of what we think of as attractive landscaping is coming in direct conflict with what we know the science is telling us about structure ignitions and things like that. So it's a very, very difficult place to find ourselves in right now. I think that the transitions will occur. I mean, think about it. What would happen if 50 years from now, your paradigm is that anybody who has a plant within 5 feet of their house is like, what's wrong with them? They've got a plant near their house. That kind of thing. I think we'll get there someday, but it's not going to happen overnight, and it's going to be a painful choice for a lot of people. We have to kind of recognize that. IBHS, on behalf of the insurance industry, a lot of the testing that they're doing is driven because the insurance company is saying, tell us what works. Tell us what people need to do to their homes to limit or reduce or maybe even eliminate the likelihood of structures igniting. Tell us what works. And that's why they're doing all that testing, and they're saying, hey, 5 feet works. And so the insurance companies are saying, copy that. 5 feet works. No plants within 5 feet. Or we will non-renew you. Yes?
As far as no plants within 5 feet, it seems like succulents and, really green, wet plants should be acceptable.
You're right. So the question was that certain species of plants like succulents and moist, heavily watered plants should be acceptable. So I'll share with you what's going on. Because of this 5-foot rule, the legislature actually passed a law that said that the Board of Forestry shall create new regulatory language in the Public Resource Code that outlines how to do that 5-foot zone. And the new regulations are now being published by the Board of Forestry, but the way regulations work is that the Public Resource Code is just the guideline. It says, you shall have an address sign at your house. You shall have a defensible space around your house. You shall have a non-combustible zone around your house, all these kind of things. But the details of how that works, your address sign has to be a minimum of 3-inch letters that have a minimum of 1/2 inch stroke, reflective on a contrasting background, et cetera, et cetera. So that goes into the code, California Code of Regulations, CCRs. So the CCRs in the state of California are the actual details of how to comply with the regulatory language in the Public Resource Code. Are you all falling asleep here now? This is like terrible stuff. But that's the way this works. So some of the language that's going to be incorporated into the CCR language is not completed yet. And why? Because the committee that they put together, they brought together a diverse group of people to discuss and come to conclusions on what that 5-foot zone package looks like. Not even the committee could come to conclusions on it. It was that controversial about people saying, I don't want to have a non-wood fence next to my house. True, some said that. They didn't sit through my class. But the fact is that they're still looking at it. IBHS has put together a new program. You can go onto their website and look at a program that they've put together called the Wildfire Prepared Home, which the insurance industry is looking at. And if you look up Wildfire Prepared Home, it's a very, very black and white picture. The first Wildfire Prepared Home was designated for one of the new homes in Paradise, California just a few months ago. And there now are more wildfire, people applying that they have to pay for an application, they get an assessment of their house, and if they meet the requirement, they get a certificate from IBHS saying, you meet the requirements and are designated as a wildfire prepared home. So it asks the question, will the insurance industry say, show us that certificate and we'll be good? Some may likely do that. We'll see on April 12th if any of them build that into their regulatory packages. I don't know whether they will or not, but we'll see. But the Wildfire Prepared Home by IBHS, because they're being funded by the insurance industry, and the insurance industry is using the findings that they are coming up with as the guideline for Wildfire Prepared Home, says these are the things that work. But, and there's a big but here, even IBHS will admit freely that we're still learning. We don't know. When they get contacted by somebody that says, I've got my 250-year-old oak tree next to my house and there's big branches overhanging the roof, why is that a risk to my house? Because oak trees are highly wildfire resilient. I would be willing to bet a lot of money that that oak tree right next to that house is not a cause of concern for that homeowner from burning up and causing the house to burn up. That's not what happens. Oak trees don't ignite structures on fire because oak trees are highly resilient. What normally happens is if the house starts on fire, the burning house burns the oak tree, not the other way around. Seen it many, many times. I've got photos. Okay? So what we're faced with is that IBHS is even freely admitting the fact that this is what we know today, but we're learning new things every day. And those regulatory changes and those requirements and guidelines for the 5-foot zone and things like that will likely change over time. And the Board of Forestry, because I know them, I've talked to them and they recognize the fact that that cell and that enforcement of nothing combustible within 5 feet is going to be next to impossible. So they've done exactly the same thing of saying, The language is going to come out. When it gets finished, there will be certain species that will be acceptable in minimal quantities, minimal size, and don't put stuff under windows. Because if stuff starts burning under windows, you risk the likelihood that the flame and heat could actually compromise the glass. And if it breaks, then that provides a path for the fire to get in the house. So you don't want anything around windows and door openings and things like that. But the regulatory language for the state of California is going to be different than what the wildfire prepared home guidelines are for IBHS. We know that already, even though they're not published yet. But that's why we're still learning. We don't know everything yet, and we're using the best information we can to do that. But back to how that all affects you. What you do and the requirements that they are going to put on people to comply with fire safety regulations and Firewise communities. The Department of Insurance on Ricardo Lara's homepage actually talks about this whole thing in the Safer from Wildfires and specifically calls out NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association's Firewise USA program, which is an integral part of what's happening here in Santa Barbara with the RWMP program. Many of you, how many of you are in Firewise communities here or in the process of becoming Firewise? So a number of you, okay? That is specifically called out in the regulations from the Insurance Commissioner's Office for insurance companies to recognize, and they have to take that into account. It doesn't mean that they still can't choose to non-renew you or something like that, but it makes them look at it and just not wipe their fingers and say, oh, they're in that zip code, we don't care. Okay? They have to pay attention to what you're doing, and so therefore, if you've done all the right stuff and you've got your property and your house dialed, that is going to carry a lot more weight in the future than it ever has in the past. A lot more. I can guarantee you that. Nothing that you do today is going to be without cause. It's going to be important, it will be valuable, and it will mean something. And you'll get a benefit out of it. We know that that's going to be the case. I pulled off some things here. This is strictly, I cut and pasted this morning. This is straight off the homepage of the Insurance Commissioner's website. And look at this. Commissioner Lara protects policyholders affected by wildfires. Being safer from wildfires can help your insurance. Learn about wildfire recovery and actions. What do you think the Insurance Commissioner's whole world is focused on right now? There's something about COVID-19 and tips for winter storms. But what's all the rest of it about? Wildfire. They're putting a lot of effort and they're going to pay attention to how that works. This is straight off their webpage. So there's a lot of information in here that you can go get about this Safer from Wildfire stuff. The Safer from Wildfires, here's the link. This is again straight out of their page and things like that. So you can click on it. Here to view the list of insurance companies currently offering discounts. Now that includes the Firewise program. The Firewise USA program was started in about the early 2000s, 2001, 2002, by NFPA, and so it's been around for over 20 years now. And there are some communities across the country that have been members of Firewise for 20 years. And so as you start on this, I'm going to say maybe 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, USAA Insurance Company recognized Firewise and said, hey, you know what? That makes a difference. When you get a community, a neighborhood, that becomes collectively focused on reducing the risk of wildfire around their homes and their properties, that means something to them. And they were the first insurance company that started offering discounts for people who lived in Firewise communities. More companies and more companies are jumping on board. And the new Safer from Wildfires specifically calls that out, that if you've got Firewise communities, then you need to consider that. There are over 2,500 Firewise communities around the country in about 40 states. 640 of them are here in California alone. So you can see how big of a deal it is for people in California. Right now, I can tell you for a fact, because I work part-time within FPA on the Firewise program, there are over 150 applications sitting in the pipeline right now for communities around the state of California on top of the 640 that are already there. Now, it is safe to say that the vast majority and the biggest reason why people are asking to join Firewise is because of this. Because after April 12th, insurance companies have to consider if you live in a Firewise community, that means something. And it also means that you as a community and neighbors are taking action into your own hands. Firewise doesn't cost you anything. It's not a regulated program. It doesn't have to, you don't have to get permits or do anything with it. It's just a voluntary effort for you and your community members and your neighbors to come together and say, you know what? We live in an area that is a high fire risk, and we need to do something about it. Let's all get together and work together on it. And in the next 5 years, we'd like to achieve this. And in 10 years, we'd like to achieve this. And keep working on it. Because guess what, folks? Like I talked about earlier today, the fire problem isn't going away. And it's not getting smaller. So start today. Yes, sir? No, I didn't click on that. I guess I could go online here and maybe see it, but I don't have the list. I didn't pull it up and show the list. Yes. Yeah.
And it doesn't really tell you what percentage discount they're going to offer. And usually it's pretty small. The last time I looked at it.
Yeah. So we're talking here about, for those remotely, we're talking here about the list of insurance companies that are currently offering those discounts and what that might be. And of course, that is up to each insurance company to determine how they want to roll that into their package. That will be what those new rate packages that come in on April 12th will tell us. So we'll see what that shows once that's there. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's a quid pro quo for the insurance companies to be able to raise their rates if they, in fact, follow the safer wildfire protocols. Because companies are leaving the state because they can't raise the rates. And in a way, it's better for us if they did raise the rates and we kept the private insurance instead of being thrown out of fair plan. So, I mean, is there going to be provisions that they can legitimately raise their rates so that they would stay in the state?
So the question is, are there going to be provisions where the insurance companies can raise their rates and still remain in business in California and things like that? The answer is, I don't know, but here's the way it works. The insurance commissioner's office reviews the rate plans and the rate packages that insurance companies put forth, and they are allowed to raise rates, but only by a certain percentage on an annual basis. So there are guidelines and rules in the state of California that limit how much insurance can be raised per year. One of the anomalies is that every state has an insurance commissioner, right? In California, the insurance commissioner happens to be an elected position. In many states across the country, they're appointed positions. In California, because it's, no, I shouldn't say, I think it's about a 50-50 split for across the country for those that are elected versus those that are appointed. But it's a fair shot that historically in the state of California, people who run and want to be elected as the insurance commissioner tend to have an eye on a higher office, and they want to go up the ladder a little bit, maybe run for governor in a few years or something like that. So their default is to be very conservative and courteous and a supporter of the policyholders. You, the family people, because guess what? You're all voters. So they don't want to do something that's going to impact them, but that turns the tide because it makes it much more difficult for the insurance industry. And you're exactly right that the insurance companies, there have been some insurance companies that have left because they didn't feel that their models were going to be profitable enough for them by continuing to work here with the limitations of not being able to raise their rates the way they wanted to. One of the big problems is that the cost of these insurance companies to have reinsurance has gone up dramatically because of these problems. What happens is that in the state of California, at least currently, the insurance companies are not allowed to apply the reinsurance costs to their rate packages. So even though these costs have gone up for them, they can't pass that through to their consumers. And that's the primary reason why most insurance companies have left, because their reinsurance rates have gone up so much, they don't have the ability to collect that or fill that back in, and they just can't do business. And so they've decided to leave. On the flip side, what you don't hear much about is the fact that even though, yes, insurance companies have left California, there are other insurance companies that are looking at it going, there's an opening for me. That looks pretty attractive. And there have been insurance companies that have come into California that never did business here before. So it's not like the entire industry is rushing away from California. You pretty much only hear about those that are leaving. You don't necessarily hear about those that are staying or new ones coming in. Okay, so that's the case too. What I want to also give you some other sites and things like that. There are a couple of sites that I particularly want to point out. One is III, the Insurance Information Institute. Now that is an actual insurance fed, that is an organization that works across the country that provides information about what the insurance industry is doing. And they are funded by the insurance industry. So they're kind of the spokesperson. If you really want to kind of get a good perspective, the lady who's in charge of III here in California, her name is Janet Ruiz. She lives up north. But she is a very, very good spokesperson who tells a lot of consumer information and shares a lot of information about what's going on in the insurance industry. The other one is a company called United Policyholders, a nonprofit group who was started by a lady named Amy Bach. And Amy is a phenomenal person running United Policyholders. And if you're interested, you can go onto their website, and they have what they call a WRAP presentation, which stands for Wildfire Risk Reduction and Asset Protection Initiative. They do a WRAP presentation every month. And it mostly is all on wildfire stuff and things like this, but it's an online presentation. You can go onto their website, sign up for it, watch it, it's all free. So the United Policyholders is a very, very good consumer-oriented program, nonprofit, that helps homeowners and policyholders on insurance issues. So I highly recommend you looking up Insurance Information Institute and United Policyholders. They're really good resources for you to go to. I guess, like I talked to you, what you do matters. All this kind of stuff. I'm getting ready to kind of wrap up here, but I have not talked about the FAIR Plan. And most of you know about the FAIR Plan, right? I think if I go back. Yeah. It's an acronym, actually. It stands for Fair Access to Insurance Requirements. Okay? Anybody know how the FAIR Plan started? The FAIR Plan actually started back in the 1960s as a result of the Watts riot. The Watts riot in Los Angeles caused insurance companies to basically flee that area and say, no way, we're not doing any business with anybody. And all the businesses and people who lived in the Watts area couldn't get insurance. The state stepped in and created the FAIR Plan to go ahead and provide insurance for people who couldn't get insurance. Okay? So oddly enough, it started with the big riot. But the FAIR Plan actually has evolved into, it is the last resort, they call it, for insurance for wildfires, but it's not a complete policy. Is anybody in here on the FAIR Plan? Okay, so you guys could probably talk a lot about it more than I can. You probably understand it much better than I do. But the FAIR Plan is the backup plan, and it is funded by the insurance industry. Every company who does business, every insurance company that does business in California is required to pay a certain percentage of their business into the FAIR plan, and that's the money that supports it. It is from the insurance company. It's not state dollars. It is from the insurance industry itself, and that's the money that is used for the FAIR plan. And so the FAIR plan is sort of the last resort for wildfire things, but you usually have to have additional policy holder things to go ahead and cover other pieces, theft and things like that, liability and stuff like that. The FAIR plan will only cover your loss from a fire, from a wildfire. I think that's correct. Does anybody want to correct me here? Is that pretty much it?
I think there's a couple other things it covers that are minor.
Yeah, you're right, you're right. So the comment was there's a couple of other minor coverages. I think that's true. Again, two years in Santa Rosa from the Tubbs fire. And so the insurance companies were required to continue to cover you without not renewing you for that year or 2-year period. So, but it has to be a declared fire. It can't just be a minor undeclared disaster. So that's just another rule that the state of California came up with to prevent this mass exodus of, everybody who just lost their homes now receives a letter saying, oh, sorry, we're not going to insure you anymore. That kind of thing. So that put a stop to that. And so, again, that's, and there's probably a lot more. I don't know. I hope this has been somewhat informational for you, I hope, and maybe shed a little light on what my perspective is on the industry. They're going through a lot of change right now. And so kind of the trauma that's occurring with everybody just wondering what's going on and stuff, that's going to keep happening for a little while. But I would say probably in the next 5 years or so, everybody's going to get a grip on it and things will be better. And it's all going to hinge on what you folks do around your house. So go back home and rip all those plants out. And on that note, I know you guys have been sitting here for a long, long time on this beautiful sunny day, so I want to let you go and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming, and I know a lot of you have been here since 10 a.m. and we appreciate you all coming. Outside we have free home gardening signups, free plant IQ table where you can win free native seeds, free mesh samples, our demo garden. So please continue to learn. Ethan's exhibit in the back showing different home garden retrofit experiences and our home portal. If you took our event survey for our workshop, please turn it in. You get 2 free raffle tickets. And if you're new, we have a raffle going on. Tickets are $1, goes to a good cause. Thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Dave Shew, for coming down here or up here, wherever you were.
Wherever I was.
We love having you. Thanks again, everyone.
All right.